So we have another quick Unity tutorial for today. We're going to be making a conveyor belt. So the first thing we're going to need is the actual object that is going to act as the belt. We're going to use a cube. And this cube, I'm just going to scale it out on the X so that way it matches our camera. And I'm going to use 5. And we need to reposition this to 0, 0, 0. There we are. Now it's in the middle of the camera. And I'm going to rename this to conveyor belt. Just like that. And we're going to make it into a prefab just by dragging it down into the assets folder. So now that it's down there, I'm going to come back into our scene, duplicate it with Control D, bring it up, push it to the left. Just so that way we have one part here that's going to be dropping it off to the other part so we can see how that works. And now we're going to need the actual object that's going to be falling down. So we're going to do a 3D object, cube. And we see this is in the wrong spot, so I'm just going to do 0, 0, 0. I'm holding Control in order to snap it into place, so that way it's lined up perfectly. And we see this is touching exactly in the right point. And these things are going to move based on physics, so we need a rigid body. The rigid body, I'm going to make sure I'm going to freeze the rotation in the Z later, in case it's rotating around this as it's going down. And we'll take a look at that as we get there. So we have the cube there and the conveyor belt. We're good to write the script. So I'm going to create a new script, conveyor belt. And let's open up Visual Studio. All right, here we go. So we're going to start off with the variables. So there's a couple things that we're going to need. First, we're going to need to know what speed we want their object to move at. So we'll do public float speed. The next thing we're going to want is the direction that we want them to move when they're on the belt. So we'll do public vector3 direction. The last thing we're going to need is a list of game objects. So public list 1t. The type inside of here is game object. And we're going to have to give it a name. So let's call it on belt. And this is just going to tell it what's on the belt. We're not going to need anything inside of start. We are going to need something inside of update that's going to be moving the boxes. But we need to know when something collides with the belt. And that's going to be using on collision enter. So on collision enter here, we don't care what's hitting it, so we're just going to throw it right in here. On belt, we want to add the object that collided with it, and that is collision.gameObject, just like that. So that's when something collides with the belt. It's being added to the list of things that are on the belt. Next, we want to do when something leaves the belt. So we basically want to do the same thing, except for instead of adding to it, we want to remove. So we need an on collision exit, and we're going to do on belt dot remove, and now we need to tell it what game object, so we need same thing, collision dot game object, just like that. And now that we have things adding to the list and being removed when they fall off, we need to come to update, and we want to make sure that we're moving them, and we're going to move them based on their rigid body of the object. So we're going to need a for loop. So let's do for. We're going to start the array at the int of I equal to 0. And that's going to be our index I. We're going to say on belt.count is less than or equal to, oh, my bad. We're comparing I to that. So it's I is less than or equal to on belt.count minus 1. So on belt.count is the actual number of them inside of it. So it starts at 0 to 1. When we add something, it's 1. But we know that the array, or the list, is going to start at an index of 0. So we need to subtract 1 in order to account for this difference. And we do semicolon. And every time that we finish one of the loops, we want to increase I by 1, or I++, in order to check to see if we have more than one object in here. So now we want to actually be moving them. So we need to check the object that's on the belt at this index. And we want to get the component of the rigid body on them. And we want to set their velocity equal to these things up here. We have our speed and we have our direction. So we're going to set it to speed times the direction, and we're going to multiply it by time, delta time, to smooth it out. This also makes it frame rate independent. Cool. So let's go back here, and we need to put the script onto one of the belts. So we're going to add it to the first one here. And right now it's only on one of them because these are prefabs, but we didn't add it inside of here in the open prefab section. We added it to the scene. So all we have to do is override and apply all. Now it's on both of them down here. And we're going to set the speed. I'm going to set it to 100 because we multiplied it by time, the delta time. That's going to make it really small. So we have direction here. I want it to be moving to the right, which will be positive x in this case, because we see the x here pointing to the right. So this needs to be set to a number between -1 and 1 for this to work properly. And I'm going to set it to 1, so that way we're doing 1 times 100. That's going to be positive x only. And we don't have to do anything with on belt. I'm leaving it public so that we can see what it's doing behind the scenes. We see these are bold, which means they haven't been overridden to our prefab. And by applying that, now they are. So now it's on both of them. So we're all set to see what happens to this cube when we hit play. And we see the cube. It rotates as it goes by because it's adding the physics to the middle of it. There we are. And let's say we didn't want this thing to rotate. We could come down here under the rigid body on the box, and we could say freeze rotation in the Z. Just like this. And now it just goes along, falls down, just like that. And let's say we didn't want it to collide with the bottom here. We want it to be a little bit above it. That would be using a trigger, and then we would have to change out the code here to, instead of be on collision enter, it would be on trigger enter and on trigger exit. And we would have to use triggers because if we move the box collider up right here on the Y, it would actually change the collision to be above it, which is going to start the box floating above it, which is what we want. So depending on what you need for your game, you might want to set it to a trigger or just to be the solid part here. By having it be the solid part here, we also make it so that way if it's touching the bottom, it will move along with the conveyor belt thanks to this script right here, but it's going to very quickly fall off. So if we put it here, it's only going to touch it for 1 frame, and we see that it does move to the right, but it does fall off. So that's important to take note here. And that'll do it for this video. Thanks for watching.